Hello, and welcome back to Forgotten Ties. We often talk about those frayed edges of memory, the moments that slip away, the secrets families keep. But sometimes, what's forgotten isn't a memory, it's an entire life. And what's kept secret isn't a small indiscretion, it's a foundation-shattering truth. This is about a truth that was buried so deep, it took an act of sheer, bizarre chance to bring it to the surface. It starts, as the most profound tragedies often do, on a day that was utterly, perfectly ordinary. Picture this: Portland, Oregon. Not the rain, not the gray, but a clear, crisp October afternoon. A man named Elias Vance, 42 years old, an architect with a careful, measured life. Elias was the epitome of control, a meticulous planner, a man who color-coded his spice rack. He lived in a stunning, minimalist house overlooking the Willamette River, shared with his wife, Clara, a vibrant, passionate art gallery curator whose fiery red hair and booming laugh were the perfect foil to his quiet intensity. They were, by all accounts, the perfect couple. Two pieces, perfectly slotted together, building a life of quiet affluence and shared dreams. But that day, the perfect symmetry of Elias's life began to crack. He was rummaging through a box in the attic, a forgotten relic from his mother's estate after she passed away 2 years prior. It was a nondescript, heavy cardboard box, labeled simply, "Miscellaneous, Photos and Papers." He was looking for an old photo album, a picture of his father he hadn't seen in years. Most of the contents were exactly what the label promised: faded Polaroids, dried corsages, bank statements from the 90s. Then, at the bottom, tucked beneath a stack of his old high school report cards, he found it. It wasn't a photograph. It wasn't a letter. It was a single, brittle, off-white piece of plastic. A strip, faded and slightly yellowed with time. You know what it was, don't you? Immediately, the unmistakable, sterile, uncomfortable feel of a hospital wristband. And it wasn't his mother's. It wasn't his father's. It was too small to have been from a recent adult stay. This was a newborn band. A jolt, sharp and visceral, shot through Elias. He and Clara had never had children. They had tried for years, a painful, private chapter of their lives they had eventually closed, settling into their life as a dedicated couple. A newborn wristband. Why would his mother keep this? Maybe a niece? A distant relative? He was about to toss it aside, chalking it up to his mother's eccentric hoarding, when something made him pause. The print, faint, almost erased by time, but still legible on the plastic strip. The bold, black letters. Vance, Elias. His blood ran cold. The air in the attic, usually stale, suddenly felt thin, suffocating. Elias Vance. His name. Not E. Vance or Elias V. No, his full, unmistakable name. But the date was wrong. Horribly, impossibly wrong. It wasn't his birthday. Elias was born on May 12, 1983. This band read, date of birth, May 12, 1981. 2 years. 2 full, impossible years earlier. He stood there, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the attic window, the world tilting. A 4-decade-old memory, a story he thought he knew, the very foundation of his identity, was dissolving in his hands, replaced by a cheap plastic lie. What did this mean? Was it a mistake? A typo at the hospital? Hospitals make mistakes, right? But the meticulously hoarded item, kept hidden in a box under his papers. This was no casual oversight. This was a secret preserved like a relic. The name of the hospital, printed in tiny font, provided the only other clue. St. Jude's Regional Medical Center. A hospital 300 miles from where he'd always been told he was born. Elias felt a terrifying, almost predatory curiosity take root. The man of logic and control was suddenly adrift in a sea of unknown possibilities. The first lie was the easiest to ignore, the birth date. But the combination of his name and a different date and a different hospital? It screamed not of an error, but of a switch. A meticulously planned, 4-decade-long deception. He needed to talk to Clara, his anchor, his confidant. But as he looked at the wristband, A chilling thought struck him. If my parents lied about this, what else did they lie about? A knot of fear and distrust tightened in his chest. He shoved the box back, tucked the wristband into his wallet, and descended the stairs, leaving the dust and the past behind, carrying a new, terrifying shadow into his perfectly curated life. The silence between Elias and Clara that night was not the comforting, companionable quiet they usually shared. It was a thick, heavy blanket woven from Elias's unshared terror. He couldn't bring himself to show Clara the wristband. Not yet. Her trusting eyes, her effortless joy. He was afraid his discovery would poison that he would somehow contaminate her with his horrifying suspicion. The next morning, instead of heading to his architecture firm, Elias drove. Not 300 miles, not yet. He drove to the local registry office. He needed a document, a piece of paper that couldn't lie, to counteract the plastic one that screamed deceit. His quest was simple. Get a copy of his birth certificate, the official record. This, he thought, would be the definitive proof of the hospital's error, or his mother's strange eccentricity. But the woman at the counter, a stern-faced, middle-aged clerk with severe glasses, returned his request with a frustrating delay. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dry as parchment. "There's an issue with the record. The state has an amended certificate on file, but the original record is sealed by court order." Sealed. That single word echoed in his mind like a gunshot. Why would a routine birth certificate be sealed? Only one reason: legal proceedings, adoption, or a cover-up. He pressed her, his architect's precision giving way to frantic urgency. What exactly does amended mean? What was changed? The clerk remained implacable, citing privacy laws. All she could confirm was that the amended certificate listed his birth date as May 12, 1983, and the birthplace as the hospital his parents had always claimed. But the court-sealed original? That remained hidden. The 2-year discrepancy on the wristband suddenly gained monstrous credence. Elias felt a desperate need to re-examine the box, to find something else his mother might have hidden. He drove back, climbed to the attic, and this time he systematically emptied every item. Beneath a sheaf of old bills, he found a small, leather-bound diary, tucked away with the spine facing the wall. It wasn't his mother's careful, looping script. It was his father's, though rougher, more hurried, almost illegible. His father, a taciturn man who had passed away 5 years prior, was not one for journaling. Elias's hands trembled as he opened it to a page marked May 15, 1981, just 3 days after the date on the wristband. The entry was short, clipped, and chilling. "The transfer is complete. She won't stop crying. It was the only way. The papers are with Helen. Tell no one. We are Elias's true parents now. God forgive us." The words were a brutal, blinding punch. The transfer is complete. She won't stop crying. We are Elias's true parents now. It wasn't an error. It wasn't a typo. It was an adoption. A clandestine, perhaps even illegal, transfer that had been disguised as a natural birth. And the chilling part? The date, 1981. The year on the wristband. The man he thought was his father knew, and his mother, who had kept the evidence, was complicit. A wave of nausea washed over him. His entire life was a carefully constructed facade. He wasn't Elias Vance, born of the Vance lineage. He was someone else's crying baby, taken or given up, and thrust into a new life with a new date of birth. But who was she? The she who wouldn't stop crying? His biological mother. And who was Helen? His mother's closest friend, Helen Marshall, a sweet, elderly woman who lived in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. A woman who had always treated Elias with a strange, almost nervous affection. The architect, the man of order, was now a detective driven by a horrifying sense of betrayal. He needed to talk to Helen, to understand this transfer. He drove downstairs, the small diary heavy in his hand, the name Helen, a searing brand in his mind. He finally confessed to Clara, laying the brittle wristband and the open diary on their pristine, white marble kitchen counter. Clara, the vibrant woman whose world was color and light, turned instantly pale. Her booming laugh was gone, replaced by a stunned, tearful silence. Her initial instinct was denial, then pity for his parents' desperation, but the cold, hard words in the diary, "The transfer is complete," spoke of something darker than mere desperation. It spoke of a transaction. Elias saw the fear in her eyes, a fear that mirrored his own. What if the real Elias Vance is still out there? The journey to Phoenix was a silent, agonizing blur. Elias and Clara drove, the weight of the secret pressing them into the leather seats. They had agreed. They needed to confront Helen Marshall. She was the last living link to the dark knot of 1981. The conversation with Clara had been devastating, but it had solidified their bond. She was horrified, heartbroken for him, but her loyalty was absolute. "We'll face this together, Elias," she had whispered, clinging to him. The discovery had stripped away his identity, but paradoxically, it had revealed the strength of his marriage. Helen Marshall lived in a quaint, terracotta-roofed house with a sprawling, sun-drenched garden. When she opened the door, her kind, wrinkled face held the familiar warmth, but as her eyes fell upon the object Elias held, the worn leather diary, the color drained from her cheeks. The composure of 40 years instantly vanished. She invited them in, her hands trembling as she poured tea. The air in her sunroom was thick with unspoken history. Elias, dropping the pretense, placed the diary and the wristband on her glass-top table. "Helen," he said, his voice flat with forced control, "this is my father's journal. It mentions a transfer in May 1981. It mentions you and sealed papers. I need you to tell me the truth about St. Jude's Regional Medical Center." Helen dissolved. Tears streamed down her face, the dam of decades-long silence finally bursting. She confessed to everything, not in a rush, but slowly, painfully, piecing together the fragments of a story that was far more sinister than Elias had imagined. His parents, unable to conceive and desperate for a child, had been contacted by a shady broker Helen knew through a distant relative. This wasn't a formal adoption. It was a purchase. The baby, Elias, or the child he was told he was not an orphan. He was one of twins. The revelation hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. A twin. The sheer, overwhelming implication of this flooded his mind. Somewhere, there was a man or a woman who shared his DNA, his original birthday, and who had been separated from him at birth. The transfer wasn't just about moving him from one hospital to another and changing the date. It was about tearing apart a family, a primal connection. Helen explained that the mother of the twins was a young, unwed woman named Seraphina Reyes. She was a struggling student who had been promised a significant sum for one of her babies, under the pretense that the Vances were a wealthy, loving family who would give the child a better life. Seraphina, in her desperation, had reluctantly agreed to part with one baby, believing the other would stay with her. But the Vances, driven by a possessive, selfish desire, had paid the broker to engineer the whole process, even creating the amended birth certificate and sealing the original records to cover their tracks. Helen's involvement was peripheral. She was asked to hold the sealed papers, a separate, unofficial record of the real birth, the one that documented 2 babies. "Where are those papers, Helen?" Elias asked, the words a raw whisper. Helen walked to an old, heavy oak secretary desk and pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed and brittle. Inside were the true documents. A handwritten receipt of the transaction, the original birth certificate from St. Jude's listing Seraphina Reyes as the mother, and 2 names under the child's name section. Elias Vance and Silas Reyes. Silas, his twin brother. The name Silas jumped off the page, an echo of his own. Silas Reyes, still carrying their mother's name. The man he thought was his father hadn't lied about everything. He had given Elias his twin's initial, S, the same as his own. In the middle name he never used, Elias Stephen Vance. A small, pathetic attempt at a conscience, a tether to the truth. The truth was now a burning, inescapable reality. He had a twin, a brother who had grown up in a life he knew nothing about, possibly with their biological mother. The betrayal of his adoptive parents was now eclipsed by the monumental loss of a sibling connection stolen by greed and secrecy. Elias looked at Clara, his face a mask of grief. The perfect life was truly shattered. Now he had a new purpose, to find Silas Reyes. The sealed papers had given him a new name, a new identity, and a new life to search for. With the sealed papers in hand, the search for Silas began in earnest. Elias and Clara returned to Portland, but their home now felt like a temporary shelter, a place they occupied while the real, messy business of finding his true past unfolded. The first step was St. Jude's Regional Medical Center and the name Seraphina Reyes. A simple online search yielded nothing immediately connecting her to Silas, but it did reveal an important detail. The small town near the hospital where Seraphina had been a student was Willow Creek, California. Elias used the resources available to him. He hired a private investigator, bypassing the legal red tape that had previously stymied him. The PI, a seasoned, no-nonsense woman named Dana, was efficient. Within a week, she had the first crucial lead. Seraphina Reyes had moved back to Willow Creek after finishing her degree. She had married and had 2 more children, but Dana's most important discovery was a police report from 2005. The report detailed the disappearance of a 19-year-old local boy, Silas Reyes. The bottom dropped out of Elias's world again. Disappeared. The culmination of his 42-year search was not a joyous reunion, but a cold, horrifying question mark. He was so close, yet light years away. Dana provided the last known address for Seraphina. Elias and Clara drove to Willow Creek. The town was small, sleepy, and felt miles away from the life Elias had always known. They found Seraphina Reyes's house. It was unassuming, a little run down, but filled with the detritus of a busy family life. When Seraphina opened the door, Elias saw it immediately. The almond-shaped eyes, the sharp, pronounced jawline, the unmistakable features that mirrored his own. There was a moment of profound, silent recognition, a 4-decade-old cord snapping taut between them. Elias didn't hesitate. He held up the wristband and the paper with the name Silas Reyes. "My name is Elias Vance. I was born in 1981. I am one of your twin sons." Seraphina didn't deny it. The dam of her own grief and guilt broke. She invited them in, and the story unfolded, layer by agonizing layer. She had kept Silas, the baby she couldn't bring herself to part with, but the guilt of giving up Elias, and the secrecy, had poisoned her relationship with Silas. Silas was a troubled soul, constantly searching for answers about his twin brother and his mysterious father. He had found a few fragmented hints, a cryptic letter from his grandfather, a half-burned receipt, that led him to believe Elias had been taken and was living a wealthy life somewhere. On a cool evening in 2005, Silas, in a fit of despair and an overwhelming need to find his brother, had simply vanished, leaving a cryptic note. "I'm going to find him or I won't come back at all." Seraphina cried, begging Elias for forgiveness, for understanding. She had searched for years, exhausted every lead, convinced her missing son was somehow tied to the one she gave away. The final, devastating twist came from the police report Dana had found. A witness, an elderly neighbor, had reported seeing Silas get into a dark sedan outside his home on the night he disappeared. The man driving the car was older, well-dressed, and distinctly recalled as being an imposing man who bore a slight resemblance to Silas. Elias looked at the witness description, the date, and the location. An agonizing memory surfaced. His adoptive father, the taciturn, controlled man, had taken a sudden, unannounced business trip to California in the fall of 2005. The sickening conclusion was inescapable. His adoptive father, terrified that the secret would be revealed and his stolen life dismantled, had intercepted Silas before Elias could find him. He hadn't just stolen Elias. He had driven his twin to disappearance, perhaps worse, to protect the lie. The man who had raised him, the man he had mourned, was a monster. The perfect life had been built not on affection, but on abduction, deceit, and ultimately a potential murder. Elias's search for his identity had ended, but his search for justice, and the truth about his brother's fate, had just begun. He had found his truth on a brittle wristband, and now he was armed with a name and a horrifying family legacy to confront. The ties are no longer forgotten. They are frayed, broken, and stained with a terrifying secret. And that, my friends, is where this chapter of Elias's journey ends for now. The search for Silas's fate and the unraveling of the monster his father became continues. This story is a raw look at how one small lie can metastasize and consume 4 decades of a life. If Elias Vance's devastating discovery resonated with you, if the sheer power of this kind of family secret grips your soul, then you know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to Forgotten Ties right now, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next step in this journey. Because trust me, the depths of this deception are still being plumbed.